I am an American, and I killed Americans. I am a human being, and I killed human beings.
Milwaukee police find a horrifying scene inside an apartment.
I'm exactly what a serial killer looks like. I'm exactly what a sex offender looks like. It can be anybody.
Milwaukee police found body parts in a North Side apartment, and now they wonder if they've uncovered some kind of death factory.
And what they found was an apartment full of pieces of people.
We are all evil. Yes, I am evil.
There's something disturbingly captivating about serial killers. Their twisted motives, gruesome crimes, and the chilling mysteries surrounding them pull us into a dark curiosity. But what if the most shocking stories aren't the ones you know? Beneath the surface lies an even darker reality, a hidden web of manipulation, chaos, and unimaginable evil. And today, I'll unravel this shadowy world through the Iceberg Principle, starting with the surface to explore the most infamous names and stories. But as we plunge deeper, I will reveal the obscure, the disturbing, and the truly unimaginable tales of humanity's most depraved killers. But before we dive in, I gotta give you a quick disclaimer. What we're about to explore is unsettling, and definitely not for everyone. So if you're sensitive to this type of content, I invite you to check out my other videos instead. And for those brave enough to dare to watch, get ready to face the abyss.
Be aware that portions of this story are intense.
Let's start at the tip of our iceberg with a name that has haunted history, Jack the Ripper. Known worldwide as the embodiment of terror and mystery, Jack's story remains one of the most chilling unsolved cases of all time. In 1888, 5 women were found dead in the streets of Whitechapel in London, with the same chillingly operating procedure. Each woman met a horrific end, their bodies mutilated with chilling precision. The brutality of the murders hinted at a killer with an unsettling knowledge of human anatomy, leaving the city paralyzed with fear. So did the police manage to catch him? No. What made Jack even more terrifying was his ability to vanish without a trace. Despite hundreds of tips, countless letters from the public, and the Metropolitan Police throwing everything they had at the case, Jack's identity is still a mystery, even now, 140 years later. And while the police were doing everything they could to catch him, it is believed that Jack was sending taunting letters to the press, some containing gruesome details of his crimes, as if he was narrating his twisted legacy. One even arrived with a human kidney allegedly from one of his victims. But all of this is just speculation because experts today question whether those letters really came from Jack. Some were likely hoaxes, written by pranksters or journalists looking to sensationalize the case further. Yet, despite decades of speculation, not a shred of conclusive evidence has surfaced to unmask the shadowy figure who terrorized the city. Who was he? Why did he do it? And how did he disappear completely? Questions that will forever remain unsolved, classified as one of history's darkest mysteries. Our descent into the iceberg takes us to a name that shocked the world all over again after the explosive Netflix series in 2022. Jeffrey Dahmer, infamously dubbed the Milwaukee Cannibal.
His killing field was Milwaukee, and he got away with murder for more than a decade.
Jeffrey Dahmer took him to his parents' house. There, he strangled him with a barbell.
It all started in 1978 when, at just 18 years old, Dahmer claimed his first victim. Over the next 13 years, he would go on to murder 17 men. To attract them, he was often luring them with promises of money or companionship, only to drug, assault, and ultimately kill them. But what sets Dahmer even more horrifying is not just the sheer number of his victims, but the nature of his crimes as he was trying some experiments. For example, he attempted to create what he called zombies by injecting acid into his victims, but obviously, it didn't work. And while some bodies were disposed of, others were dismembered with parts eerily preserved in his apartment. And as disturbing as it is to say, some were even consumed. His reign of terror finally ended in 1991, when one of his intended victims managed to escape and flag down the police. When they discovered the macabre truth, it was like stepping into a living nightmare. His apartment was like a museum of his depravity, with severed heads, a human heart, and other body parts stored in his refrigerator. Even torsos were submerged in barrels of acid, and as if that wasn't enough, dozens of photographs meticulously documented his acts, each one more horrifying than the last. Dahmer's crimes earned him a sentence of 16 consecutive life terms, ensuring he would never leave prison. However, his story ended in 1994, just 2 years after his conviction, when another inmate attacked and killed him, marking a violent conclusion to a life defined by violence. Now, what if a charming smile and a friendly demeanor could hide the mind of a killer?
You made a good lawyer. I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner.
Ted Bundy was the ultimate manipulator, proving that evil can be terrifyingly ordinary. Known as one of America's most notorious serial killers, Bundy seemed like the perfect guy. Well-spoken, ambitious, even studying law. But beneath that polished exterior was a calculated predator. Between 1974 and 1978, he began targeting young women across multiple states, luring them in by pretending to be injured or needing help. But once they approached, it was already too late. He was the guy no one suspected, but in reality, his crimes were horrific. Bundy not only murdered his victims, but often assaulted them, and in some cases, returned to their bodies for even more disturbing acts. He confessed to decapitating several victims and keeping their heads as trophies. In total, he claimed to take the lives of at least 30 women, though many experts believe the true number is much higher. Bundy was first arrested in 1975, but his ability to manipulate extended even to law enforcement. In 1977, he dramatically escaped custody not once, but twice.
Bundy jumped out of this second-story window at the front of the Pitkin County Courthouse this morning.
During his second escape, he went on to commit some of his most heinous crimes, including the horrific attack on a sorority house in Florida that left 2 women dead and others gravely injured, cementing his reputation as a cold-blooded killer. His trial became a media spectacle, with Bundy defending himself in court. It was one of the first nationally televised trials in history. But justice finally caught up with him, and in 1989, he was executed in the electric chair. During the late 1960s in Northern California, a mysterious murderer turned his crimes into a twisted game, leaving behind riddles and fear. His name, the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac's killing spree began in December 1968, when 2 teenagers were shot and killed near Vallejo in California. Over the next year, he struck several more times, targeting young couples in secluded areas. Officially, 5 murders have been attributed to the Zodiac Killer. However, in his letters to the press, he claimed to have killed 37 people. But the true terror came after the murders. Unlike most serial killers who tried to stay in the shadows, the Zodiac did the opposite. He sent cryptic letters and ciphers to newspapers, taunting the public and police, claiming that one of them would even reveal his identity. One cipher was even cracked in 2020, revealing a chilling message saying, "I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise." What's even more frustrating is that despite decades of investigation, many of these ciphers remain unsolved and the Zodiac was never caught. Who was this person who taunted the world with his arrogance and cryptic puzzles? Well, despite countless theories about the Zodiac's identity, authorities only ever publicly named one suspect: Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender. Allen's name first surfaced during the investigation due to several suspicious connections to the case, but each time the evidence fell short. No DNA match, no concrete proof, just fragments of theories and circumstantial connections. And he died in 1992, leaving his potential role in the Zodiac killings unresolved. And even though it's purely theoretical and should be taken with caution, Zodiac's murders seem to stop after Arthur's death. Coincidence? Who knows? What if the truth was even harder to believe than the lies? Henry Lee Lucas's life was as chaotic as the mythos he created around himself.
A videotaped confession by admitted killer Henry Lee Lucas.
Henry Lee Lucas, who claims to have killed over 150 women, was brought into an area at an undisclosed location.
Have confirmed his involvement in more than 200 murders.
In the 1980s, Henry Lee Lucas's name struck fear across the nation. He confessed to over 600 murders, claiming the title of one of the most prolific serial killers in history. But as investigators dug deeper, the story began to fall apart. The details didn't add up, timelines clashed, and soon, his case turned into one of America's most bizarre and twisted tales, where fact, fiction, and manipulation blurred together into one chaotic mess. Henry's life was shaped by hardship and violence from the very beginning. Born into a desperately poor family, he endured relentless trauma. His father was a disabled alcoholic, and his mother, a violent prostitute. The abuse he suffered was constant and brutal, leaving scars that would define the rest of his life. By the age of 14, Henry had already committed his first known murder, strangling a girl who rejected his advances, but it was a few years later that his life took a dark and irreversible turn. In 1960, during a fit of rage, he murdered his own mother, a crime that finally caught up with him and put him behind bars for 10 years. After his release from prison, Henry's life spiraled completely out of control. He drifted through a haze of petty crimes, homelessness, and eventually, murder. Teaming up with his partner in crime, Otis Toole, Henry claimed an unmanageable number of killings across multiple states. The way he described these murders, down to the gruesome details, painted him as a cold, remorseless predator. But the question is, how much of it was real? Many of Henry's confessions didn't add up. For example, he claimed to have committed murders hundreds of miles apart on the same day. The timelines and logistics just didn't make sense. Investigators realized he was fabricating much of his story, often feeding off details they inadvertently provided. But why would he do it? Well, it turned out Henry was a pathological liar. By spinning these gruesome tales, he got better treatment in prison, avoided hard labor, and became the center of a media frenzy. And let's face it, he probably enjoyed the twisted fame. Of the hundreds of murders he confessed to, only 3 were definitively linked to him, including the killing of his mother. The rest were fabrications or exaggerated truths, leaving countless families with more questions than answers. In 1998, Henry was finally sentenced to death for his supposed crimes, but later had his sentence commuted to life in prison. He died in 2001 at 64 years old. To this day, the true extent of his crimes remains uncertain, overshadowed by his lies. What if the friendly neighbor hosting barbecues and dressed up as a clown for kids' parties turned out to be one of the most brutal killers in history? That's exactly who John Wayne Gacy was, also known as the Killer Clown.
Hey, I got news for you. I killed 33 times. You're only gonna kill me once. Gacy outsmarted him again.
But his makeup wasn't just a disguise for parties, it was a mask hiding horrors you can't imagine. On the surface, John Wayne Gacy was the perfect picture of a community man. He was a successful businessman, active in local politics, and even volunteered his time performing as Pogo the Clown at charity events and kids' parties. To everyone around him, he seemed like the kind of person you could trust. But behind the cheerful mask was a man hiding unimaginable evil. John's first known murder occurred in January 1972, when he lured a 16-year-old boy into his home. After stabbing him, Gacy later described the act as exhilarating. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy lured at least 33 young men and boys into his home. Once inside, the nightmare began. The so-called handcuff trick was Gacy's signature move. He'd pretend it was part of a clown act, binding his victims' hands while dressed as Pogo. But once they were restrained, the horror escalated. Gacy subjected his victims to unspeakable acts of torture and abuse before ending their lives. For years, John's crimes went unnoticed, hidden behind his friendly persona. But in December 1978, the disappearance of another 15-year-old boy led police to John's doorstep. What they found inside was a scene of unimaginable horror.
This is where 12 of the 13 bodies were buried. Searchers are being hindered by water, which keeps filling in their holes.
Recovery 6 additional bodies, which brings our count up to 15 at this point in time. 3 of the bodies that have what we would consider strangulation cords or ligatures around their necks.
John had buried 26 victims beneath his house in a crawl space, their bodies hidden for years. Additional remains were discovered in the yard and nearby waterways, bringing the total to 33 known victims. He was sentenced to death and spent 14 years on death row, during which he bizarrely took up painting self-portraits of himself as Pogo the Clown. And to make it even creepier, these paintings occasionally surface in auctions, sparking debates about the morality of profiting from such sinister artifacts. On May 10, 1994, he was executed by lethal injection, but even in his final moments, his chilling last words were a stark reminder of his complete lack of remorse. The killer clown has since become a cultural symbol, referenced in countless works of fiction, and even an inspiration for Pennywise in Stephen King's movie. To wrap up the surface level of our iceberg, let's dive into the chilling story of Ed Kemper, infamously known as the co-Ed Killer.
And a week later, I murdered my mother. Went back to Santa Cruz and killed her.
His crimes, committed between 1972 and 1973, left 10 people dead. But his notoriety stems from much more than the number of victims. Standing at an imposing 6 feet 9 inches tall and weighing over 300 pounds, Kemper was a giant in both stature and intellect. Boasting a genius-level IQ of 145, this earned him the label of a brilliant psychopath, a chilling combination that made him all the more dangerous. At just 15 years old, he murdered both of his grandparents in cold blood, telling police he just wanted to see what it felt like to kill grandma. Deemed a danger to society, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital and diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. Yet, shockingly, he was released at the age of 21, declared rehabilitated. Between 1972 and 1973, Kemper embarked on a killing spree that earned him the nickname the Co-Ed Killer, which tied directly to the chilling pattern of his crimes. He targeted young female college students, often hitchhiking near campuses in California. Using his charm and intelligence, he gained their trust before brutally murdering them. His methods were horrifying, strangling or shooting his victims, then taking their bodies home, where he mutilated, dismembered, and committed acts of necrophilia. The climax of his spree came in April 1973 when Kemper turned his rage toward his mother. While she slept, he killed her, decapitated her, and used her head as a dartboard. As if that weren't enough, he murdered her best friend the very next day. But then, in a shocking twist, Kemper calmly called the police from a phone booth, confessed to his crimes, and surrendered. When asked why he turned himself in, Kemper simply said he was tired of the killing. Kemper was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and remains incarcerated to this day, a living reminder of how intelligence and evil can intertwine to create unimaginable horror.